Hi and welcome to this tutorial video on toe-up socks where I will show you how to do the cuff. The cuff is the ribbing on top of the sock, and I have some few tips and tricks to get you started. So this tutorial, I will be filming it for both DP ends and on circular needles, but first I will be showing you some tips that will apply to both kinds of needles. So some people always doubt where to put in their cuff or where to start the cuff. And I'm going to show you the standard place where to start your cuff. So usually when you fold a sock flat like this, it will be, when the cuff is added, it will touch the toe. Like it will be just as long as the toe. So you can fold your sock and you can see how long you want your cuff to be. So I would have to knit about this much of a cuff, and I'm pretty fine with that. I like long cuffs. Of course, this can all be adapted to your personal preference, but you know, I like my socks not to be super long, but I do like a long cuff. So I'm gonna be starting my cuff here. I will be doing that with the same colored yarn, but I'm gonna give you some advice if you would like to put in a contrasting cuff. Usually a cuff is 2x2 rib or 1x1 rib, so it involves some purling. And if you are knitting a contrasting color cuff, I strongly advise to just do one round of plain stockinette knitting before you start the cuff. I'm going to show you why. So I'm just going to knit a few stitches. And you see that the transition is pretty much, you know, it's very nice. But if you do purl stitches, you will see that the colors, you know, there's not a really nice edge because the colors, how do I say this? The main color appears up top and the contrast color appears in the bottom here. So you kind of have the mix of the two colors, and some people like that as a design element to have their cuff like that, but I'll show you what it kind of would look like. So some people like that element, but you know, I personally don't. So if you just knit one round of plain knitting before starting the purl stitches or before starting the ribbing for the cuff, you will not have this. So that's just something to keep in mind if you have a contrasting cuff. Thirdly, when you want to do the cuff, make sure you have the right amount of stitches. So if you want to do a 2x2 ribbing cuff, which means knit 2, purl 2, you have to make sure to have a multiple of 4 stitches, which is, you know, the usual stitch count in sock patterns. You usually have 60 stitches, or 64, 68, 72. The bigger sizes are usually just 4 stitches away. If you want to do 1x1 ribbing, you do not necessarily need a multiple of 4 stitches, you just need a multiple of 2. So you can go for in-between sizes like 62 stitches or 66 stitches, but you know, make sure you have the right stitch count. So now onto the actual knitting of the cuff. I prefer to knit my cuffs continental, since I can switch more quickly to purl. So it's knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, And I have just knit 2 and I only have 1 stitch left here because I had 30 stitches on each side of the sock, which means on the front 2 DPNs I each have 15 stitches. So there are 2 ways you can go about this. You can just continue. It doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of preference. I like my groups of 2 stitches to be together. So I will just knit 1 more stitch purlwise from this needle. There. So that on this needle I have an even stitch count and I get to start with a knit stitch rather than a purl stitch, as that might also be easier. Now for this needle I am ending on 2 knit stitches, which means I have to start with 2 purl stitches here. Now I don't particularly find that a problem. You just have to have your yarn in front and your needle goes on top of that like this. So I don't really find that challenging, but some people might just like to start every needle with the knit stitches. So if that's the case, you can just slip these 2 stitches on the previous needle and it will be fine. It doesn't really matter anymore, the placement of the stitches on the needle, since you won't be doing any increasing or decreasing anymore. So that won't be an issue anymore. So now I've come to the end of the 3rd DPN, which I ended on 2 purl stitches, which is great, since that means I have the correct stitch count. So that is how you do the cuff. You just, for the next couple of rounds, you just knit the knit stitches, purl the purls, until you find that your cuff is long enough. And then come meet me back in the next video where I show you how to cast off with a stretchy bind off. So on circular needles it's pretty much the same. The only difference is that you have only 2 needles to divide your stitches on. So once you have both, once you have an even number on both stitches, then you're fine. So let me just start with the first round of ribbing. We start with knit 2, then purl 2. Oh. Not splitting the yarn, purl 2, knit 2, now, and we just ended on knit 2. So that means for the next needle we're going to start with purl 2. Now that might not be your favorite thing to do when knitting on magic loop. I'm going to show you how to do it. So in order to start with purl stitches, you take your yarn in front of your needle and you purl like this. So it's just slightly different from doing knit stitches. This can be slightly annoying to do when knitting in around. So I completely understand if you don't want to start with purl stitches. In that case, what you need to do to transfer those stitches to the back needle is to just pull out this needle just like this. So you have 2 stitches more on that needle. And this way you can just start with knit stitches on both needles. And this won't matter The fact that the stitch count is different for both needles, since we're not doing any decreases or increases anymore, we're not doing any Kitchener stitching, so that doesn't matter at all. So just go ahead and complete your cuff like this, knitting the knits, purling the purls, and then meet me back for the next instruction video where I will show you how to cast off with a stretchy bind off for your socks.